Stay with me, because what happened next changed 3 lives forever. The woman laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a nervous laugh. The kind of laugh that makes everyone nearby look up from their food. Daniel Brooks sat frozen in the booth across from her. Beside him, his 9-year-old son, Mason, lowered his eyes toward the table. The woman shook her head and reached for her purse. So let me get this straight, she said. You are 44, you work maintenance jobs, and you have a kid? Daniel forced a small smile. That is about right. The woman stood. This blind date was a waste of time. Without another word, she walked away through the crowded restaurant. Her high heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor until the sound disappeared beyond the entrance doors. Silence settled over the booth. Mason stared at the untouched basket of fries between them. Then he quietly counted on his fingers. That makes 18. Daniel looked at his son and managed a tired smile. You are keeping track? Mason shrugged. You always tell me numbers matter. Daniel laughed softly, but there was sadness behind it. 18 blind dates. 18 women who lost interest the moment he told them he was just an ordinary working man. None of them knew that Daniel Brooks owned one of the largest hospitality companies in the state. None of them knew he could buy the restaurant they were sitting in without checking his bank account. That was the point. After losing his wife 5 years earlier, Daniel had spent years wondering whether genuine connections still existed. So he started testing people. No luxury watch. No expensive car. No mention of private investments or hotel properties. Just Daniel. Yet every test seemed to end the same way. Mason broke a fry in half. Maybe we should stop doing blind dates. Daniel looked out the window. Maybe. Across the restaurant, a young waitress had witnessed the entire scene. Olivia Bennett balanced a tray against one shoulder while watching the empty chair across from Daniel. She had seen awkward dates before. She worked at a restaurant. Awkward dates were practically part of the menu. But something about the little boy sitting quietly beside his father caught her attention. Mason was pretending to be brave. Olivia recognized that look immediately. She had worn it herself many times growing up. A few minutes later, she walked toward their table carrying 2 steaming mugs. Daniel looked up in surprise. I do not think we ordered anything else. Olivia smiled warmly. You did not. She gently placed one mug in front of Daniel and another in front of Mason. Rich hot chocolate. Fresh whipped cream. The boy's eyes widened. For us. Olivia nodded. On the house. Daniel frowned. Why? Olivia glanced toward the front door where the blind date had disappeared. Then she looked at Mason. Because bad days should never end without something good. Mason smiled for the first time all evening. Daniel stared at the waitress. She was not flirting. She was not asking questions. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply being kind. Olivia gave them one last smile before returning to work. Daniel watched her disappear into the crowd of customers. For reasons he could not explain, he suddenly felt something he had not felt after any of the previous 18 dates. Hope. Daniel could not stop thinking about the waitress. The next morning, he sat inside his downtown office on the 32nd floor of Brooks Hospitality headquarters, staring through a wall of glass at the city below. His assistant was discussing quarterly reports. His chief financial officer was waiting for approval on a hotel acquisition worth millions of dollars. Yet Daniel barely heard a word. His mind kept drifting back to a simple cup of hot chocolate and a woman who had expected nothing in return. Are you listening? His assistant finally asked. Daniel blinked. Sorry, what was the question? By noon, he had signed every document placed in front of him, attended 2 meetings, and approved a renovation budget for a luxury resort. Then he did something unusual. He left work early. 40 minutes later, he walked through the doors of the same restaurant wearing the same inexpensive jacket he had worn on the blind date. Mason sat beside him in the booth. The boy immediately noticed where they were. We came back. Daniel shrugged. Maybe I wanted lunch. Mason smiled knowingly. Sure. The restaurant was busy. Customers filled booths. Plates clattered from the kitchen. Servers moved quickly between tables. Daniel glanced around casually until he spotted Olivia carrying a tray near the back corner of the dining room. She looked exactly the same. No designer clothes. No dramatic entrance. Just a hardworking waitress doing her job. A few minutes later, she approached their table. Recognition appeared instantly in her eyes. Well, look who survived. Mason laughed. Daniel smiled. Barely. Olivia placed menus in front of them. I was not sure we would see you again. Why not? Daniel asked. Olivia tilted her head toward the entrance. Most people do not come back after a date like that. Mason grinned. Dad has practice. Daniel groaned. Olivia laughed softly. It was a genuine laugh. Not forced. Not polite. The sound caught Daniel off guard. For the first time in years, a conversation felt effortless. Olivia took their order and returned to work. Yet several times throughout lunch, she stopped briefly to check on Mason. She remembered that he liked extra pickles. She brought him a refill before he asked. She even found a small puzzle book another customer had left behind and handed it to him. None of it seemed calculated. She simply paid attention. While Mason worked on a word search puzzle, Daniel watched Olivia help an elderly couple near the window. The husband struggled to read the menu because he had forgotten his glasses. Olivia patiently sat beside them and read every special aloud without showing the slightest hint of impatience. 10 minutes later, she was helping a young mother carry a high chair across the dining room. 20 minutes after that, she was cleaning a spill while reassuring an embarrassed teenager that accidents happened. Daniel found himself asking the same question over and over. Was she always like this? When the lunch crowd finally slowed, Olivia stopped by their table again. So what do you actually do? She asked. Daniel hesitated. This was always the moment. The test. Maintenance work mostly, he replied. A little repair work. A little property upkeep. Olivia nodded. That sounds exhausting. Daniel waited for disappointment. It never came. Instead, she smiled. At least you are teaching him the value of hard work. She nodded toward Mason. Daniel looked at his son, then back at Olivia. Something shifted inside him. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone seemed interested in the man he was pretending to be rather than the man the world already knew. 3 days passed before Daniel returned again. Not because he was busy. He was always busy. Brooks Hospitality owned hotels, resorts, and commercial properties across 3 states. Every hour of his calendar was scheduled weeks in advance. The truth was simpler. He was trying to understand why a waitress he barely knew occupied so much space in his thoughts. On Thursday evening, he finally gave up pretending otherwise. He picked up Mason after school and drove straight to the restaurant. The moment they walked through the doors, Mason grinned. We are definitely not here for the burgers. Daniel shook his head. Do not start. Mason laughed and slid into their usual booth. The restaurant was crowded. The smell of grilled food drifted through the air. Conversations blended into a warm background hum. Then Daniel spotted Olivia near the register. She was helping a customer carry several takeout bags while balancing a tray on her opposite arm. Somehow she managed to do both without looking stressed. A few minutes later, she arrived at their table. You again. Her eyes sparkled with amusement. Should I reserve this booth permanently? Mason answered before Daniel could. Probably. Olivia laughed. Daniel found himself smiling too. It was becoming a habit around her. As the evening continued, Daniel noticed something unusual. Olivia seemed to know everyone. Not because she was popular, because she paid attention. She remembered names. She remembered favorite meals. She remembered details. An older man entered carrying a cane. Before he reached his table, Olivia already had his unsweetened iced tea waiting. A young couple arrived with a toddler. Olivia immediately brought extra napkins and crayons without being asked. Every small action carried the same message. She noticed people. Most of the world did not. Later, while Mason worked through another puzzle book, Daniel overheard part of a conversation near the kitchen. One of the newer servers looked upset. I do not know how I am going to pay for my textbooks this semester. Olivia glanced around to make sure nobody else was listening. Then she quietly handed the young woman several folded bills. The server immediately shook her head. I cannot take this. Olivia smiled. Then think of it as a loan. What if I cannot pay it back? Olivia shrugged. Then help someone else when you can. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet it stayed with Daniel long afterward. Most people who struggled financially guarded every dollar. Olivia seemed willing to share the little she had. That night, after the dinner rush ended, Olivia stopped by their table again. She looked tired now. The kind of tired that came from standing on your feet for 10 hours straight. Yet she still smiled. Mason looked up from his puzzle. Do you ever take a day off? Olivia laughed. Sometimes. When? Mason asked. I am beginning to think you live here. Olivia pointed toward the kitchen. There is a secret apartment behind the freezer. Mason's eyes widened. Daniel chuckled. Do not encourage him. Olivia leaned against the booth for a moment. What about you two? What do you do when you are not eating here? Daniel hesitated. Work mostly. And school, Mason added. Then he paused. And missing mom. The words slipped out before either of them expected. Silence followed. Olivia's expression softened immediately. She looked at Mason, not with pity but understanding. She must have been pretty special. Mason nodded. She was. Olivia smiled gently. Then I think she would be happy seeing how hard you are trying. Daniel looked at his son. The boy was smiling again. Not because someone felt sorry for him. Because someone had spoken to him like his feelings mattered. And for the first time since losing his wife, Daniel began wondering if fate had brought him back to this restaurant for a reason. The following week brought rain. Heavy rain. The kind that turned city streets into mirrors and sent people hurrying indoors with their heads down. Daniel normally would have spent the evening reviewing contracts at home. Instead, he found himself steering his truck toward the restaurant again. Even he was beginning to run out of excuses. Mason sat beside him watching the windshield wipers move back and forth. You know, he said casually, most people just ask someone out when they like them. Daniel nearly missed a turn. I do not know what you are talking about. Mason smiled without looking up from his tablet. Sure. When they entered the restaurant, the dining room was quieter than usual. Rain had kept many customers away. Olivia was carrying a stack of menus when she noticed them. Her face brightened immediately. The reaction lasted only a second, but Daniel saw it. Somehow that small moment affected him more than any compliment he had received in years. They settled into their usual booth. Olivia brought their drinks before they even ordered. You two are becoming regulars. Mason grinned. We have our own booth now. Olivia laughed. Not officially. As the evening progressed, Daniel noticed something unusual. Olivia kept checking her phone. Not constantly. Just enough to suggest she was worried about something. Each time the screen lit up, a shadow crossed her face before she tucked it away and returned to helping customers. Eventually Daniel asked, Everything okay? Olivia hesitated. Then she smiled. Just family stuff. Most people would have left it there. Daniel almost did. But something told him there was more behind the answer. A few minutes later Olivia was called into the kitchen. Through the small service window, Daniel caught sight of her speaking quietly with the restaurant manager. The conversation looked serious. The manager pointed at a schedule sheet. Olivia nodded several times. When she returned to the dining room, her smile was back, but it looked forced. Mason noticed too. She seemed sad. Daniel glanced toward the kitchen. Maybe she is having a tough day. 20 minutes later, an elderly customer near the front entrance struggled to stand from his chair. Before anyone else reacted, Olivia rushed over. She helped gather his belongings and walked him carefully to the door. As they spoke, the older man reached into his wallet and tried to hand her a folded bill. Olivia gently pushed his hand away. The man insisted. She refused again. Finally, he smiled and slipped the money back into his pocket. Daniel watched the entire exchange. She does that a lot, he said quietly. Mason looked up. What? Helping people? Mason nodded as though the answer was obvious. Maybe she is just nice. Daniel stared out at the rain streaking down the windows. Maybe she was. Later that night, after most customers had left, Olivia stopped by their booth carrying a small paper bag. She set it in front of Mason. What is this? He asked. The kitchen accidentally made an extra chocolate muffin. Mason opened the bag. The muffin looked perfect. Accidentally. Olivia smiled. That is my story. Mason laughed. Then Olivia glanced at the clock and sighed. For the first time, Daniel saw how exhausted she truly was. Not just physically, emotionally, as if she had been carrying responsibilities for a very long time. Long day? Daniel asked. Olivia nodded. 2 jobs will do that. Daniel blinked. You work 2 jobs? She immediately looked as though she regretted saying it. Nothing exciting. Just extra shifts somewhere else. Before Daniel could ask another question, her phone vibrated again. She checked the screen. This time the concern on her face was impossible to hide. Olivia quickly slipped the phone away. I should get back to work. Then she walked toward the kitchen. Daniel watched her disappear through the swinging doors. 2 jobs. Constant worry. Endless kindness. And somehow she still found reasons to smile. For the first time since meeting her, Daniel realized he knew almost nothing about Olivia Bennett. And suddenly he wanted to know everything. The question stayed with Daniel long after he left the restaurant that night. Who was Olivia Bennett when she was not carrying trays and smiling through exhaustion? The following afternoon, he found himself arriving earlier than usual. Mason was still at school, so Daniel came alone. The restaurant was quieter between lunch and dinner. A handful of customers occupied scattered tables. Olivia was nowhere in sight. For reasons he could not explain, disappointment settled over him. Then he spotted her through the front window. She was outside helping an elderly woman carry grocery bags from a bus stop bench to a small sedan parked nearby. The woman smiled gratefully. Olivia waved goodbye and hurried back inside just as her shift began. Daniel watched the entire exchange. Nobody had asked her to help. Nobody was watching except him. A few hours later, the dinner rush arrived. Olivia moved through the dining room with her usual energy, greeting customers by name and somehow keeping every table happy. Yet Daniel noticed something else. Whenever she thought nobody was looking, she checked her phone. The same worried expression appeared each time. Near 7 o'clock, a delivery driver entered carrying a small package. He approached Olivia directly. She signed for it and carefully placed it beneath the register. Curiosity tugged at Daniel's attention. Later, when business slowed, Olivia opened the package. Inside were several prescription bottles and medical supply receipts. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as she reviewed them. Then she folded the paperwork and tucked everything safely into her bag. Daniel looked away before she noticed him watching. Questions continued piling up. Toward closing time, another clue appeared. A young woman entered the restaurant carrying textbooks and a backpack. She looked to be about 19 years old. The moment Olivia saw her, her entire face brightened. The young woman slid into a booth near the kitchen. During every free moment, Olivia stopped to check on her. They laughed together. They shared fries from the same basket. They looked more like sisters than friends. Eventually, Olivia introduced her. "This is Hannah." The young woman smiled. "I have heard a lot about you too." Mason, who had joined Daniel after school, immediately asked, "Only good things?" Hannah laughed. "Mostly." The conversation felt easy, comfortable, as though they had all known each other much longer than a few weeks. While Olivia helped another table, Hannah glanced toward her and smiled. "She worries. Too much." Daniel looked up. "About what?" Hannah hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "Everything." Daniel remained silent. Hannah continued. "Ever since our parents passed away, she has tried to handle every problem herself." Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. "You are her sister?" Hannah nodded. "Older by 10 years. She practically raised me." The words lingered in the air. Suddenly, many things made sense. The second job, the constant exhaustion, the worried phone calls, the endless responsibility. Olivia returned before Hannah could say more. She immediately changed the subject and asked about school. Hannah rolled her eyes playfully, but answered anyway. As Daniel watched them together, he noticed something remarkable. Olivia listened to every detail, every class, every exam, every small concern. She carried herself less like a sister and more like a parent. Later, as the restaurant prepared to close, Daniel noticed Olivia quietly slipping part of her tip money into Hannah's backpack while pretending to organize receipts. Hannah never saw it happen. Daniel did. And in that moment, standing beneath the warm glow of restaurant lights, he realized that Olivia's kindness was not something she performed for strangers. It was simply who she was when nobody expected anything from her at all. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. For the first time in weeks, Daniel did not have a meeting scheduled. No conference calls, no investor presentations, no property inspections, just an open day with Mason. By noon, they were sitting at their usual booth. Olivia was working a double shift again, but somehow she still greeted them with the same genuine smile. "You two might qualify for employee discounts soon," she joked. Mason grinned. "Can I get a name tag?" Olivia laughed and promised to consider it. The afternoon passed comfortably. Customers came and went. Families filled tables. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and clattering dishes. At one point, Olivia brought Mason an extra side of fries because she claimed the kitchen had made too many. Mason immediately whispered to Daniel. That happened again. Daniel smiled. Interesting. Coincidence. A few hours later, the dining room finally quieted. Olivia found a rare moment to sit down at the empty booth beside theirs while waiting for new customers. She looked exhausted. Small shadows rested beneath her eyes. Yet her smile remained. Mason studied her for a moment before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia nodded. "Sure. Do grown-ups ever stop missing people?" The question caught both adults by surprise. Olivia looked at Daniel before answering. "I do not think so." Mason lowered his eyes. "Then how do you make it hurt less?" For several seconds, Olivia seemed to search for the right words. Finally, she smiled softly. You keep loving them. Mason looked confused. Olivia continued. You tell stories about them. You remember things that made them laugh. You carry the good parts of them with you. The boy thought about that quietly. Then he nodded. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. Olivia had no idea how much that answer meant. The conversation shifted after that, but the moment stayed with him. Later that evening, Olivia was called away to help a large party near the back of the restaurant. Daniel and Mason remained alone in the booth. The boy watched Olivia move between tables. Then he said something so unexpected that Daniel nearly dropped his coffee cup. You smile around her. Daniel looked up. What? Mason shrugged. You smile around Olivia. Daniel laughed awkwardly. I smile all the time. Mason immediately shook his head. No, you do not. The answer came so quickly that Daniel could not argue. Mason continued watching Olivia from across the room. After Mom died, you stopped smiling much. Daniel stared down at the table. The restaurant noise seemed distant for a moment. Mason rarely spoke about those years. But now you do, the boy added quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. Maybe I am just having a good day. Mason shook his head again. It is more than that. The certainty in his voice was impossible to ignore. Daniel looked toward Olivia. She was helping a young family choose desserts. Her smile looked exactly the same as always. Kind, patient, genuine. She had no idea she was the subject of this conversation. Mason leaned forward. I have not seen you laugh this much in a long time. Daniel could not find an answer, because the boy was right. Somewhere between the hot chocolate, the easy conversations, and the countless small acts of kindness, something inside him had started healing. A few minutes later, Olivia returned carrying a refill for Daniel and a fresh lemonade for Mason. Everything okay over here? She asked. Mason looked at his father, then at Olivia. A mischievous smile crossed his face. Everything is great. Olivia laughed, completely unaware of the realization she had just inspired. But Daniel knew. And as he watched her walk away once more, he understood something that frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. For the first time in 5 years, he was no longer simply looking forward to seeing Olivia. He was beginning to imagine a future that included her. The change began on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel was finishing a meeting at corporate headquarters when his assistant entered carrying a tablet. You might want to see this, she said. Daniel glanced at the screen. A local business magazine had published a feature about Brooks Hospitality's newest luxury hotel. His photograph filled the article. Beneath it was a headline praising one of the state's most successful entrepreneurs. Daniel felt his stomach sink immediately. For weeks, he had managed to keep his world separate. The restaurant, Olivia, Mason, the simple version of himself he presented to everyone outside the business world. Now that separation suddenly felt fragile. That evening, he arrived at the restaurant later than usual. Mason was already waiting in their booth after soccer practice. Olivia greeted them with her familiar smile, but Daniel noticed something different. Several employees kept glancing toward him. One whispered to another. Then both quickly looked away. The article had traveled faster than he expected. Throughout dinner, Daniel found himself watching the entrance. He was not sure what he was worried about until the front door opened. A woman stepped inside wearing an elegant designer coat. Daniel recognized her instantly. Vanessa, the same woman who had laughed at him during the blind date weeks earlier. His appetite disappeared. Vanessa scanned the dining room until she spotted him. Then her face lit up with recognition. She crossed the room immediately. Daniel. Her voice sounded warm. Too warm. Mason looked up from his meal. Daniel slowly stood. Vanessa. Olivia happened to be carrying drinks nearby. She paused briefly when she sensed the tension. Vanessa smiled brightly. I have been trying to reach you. Daniel folded his arms. Why? Vanessa laughed lightly. Come on. We got off on the wrong foot. Daniel said nothing. Vanessa stepped closer. I had no idea who you really were. The words hung in the air. Nearby conversations seemed to fade. Olivia stood perfectly still. Not because she was eavesdropping. Because she had accidentally heard enough to understand something important. Vanessa continued. I read the article this morning. You should have told me. Daniel looked at her calmly. Why would that have mattered? For the first time, her smile faltered. Because we clearly had a connection. Mason nearly choked on his drink. Daniel stared at her for several seconds. Then he shook his head. No, we did not. The answer landed harder than any argument could have. Vanessa's expression tightened. After a few awkward moments, She wished him well and walked away. The door closed behind her. Silence remained. Daniel turned around slowly. Olivia was no longer standing nearby. A strange feeling settled over him. He looked toward the service station. She was there, but something had changed. Her smile was gone. Not angry, not hurt, just distant. For the rest of the evening, she remained professional and polite. Yet the easy conversations disappeared. The laughter disappeared. Even Mason noticed. As they prepared to leave, he tugged on Daniel's sleeve. Something is wrong. Daniel nodded. I know. The next afternoon things became worse. Daniel returned alone and found Olivia working her usual shift. She greeted him kindly, but there was now a careful distance in her voice. No jokes, no playful comments, no extra conversations between tables. Finally, after nearly an hour of uncomfortable silence, Daniel asked the question he had been dreading. You saw the article, did you not? Olivia stopped for a moment. Then she nodded. Yes. Daniel waited. Olivia looked down at the order pad in her hands. You should have told me. The words were quiet, honest, and somehow far more painful than anger. Before Daniel could explain, another customer called for assistance. Olivia excused herself and walked away. Daniel watched her disappear across the dining room. For the first time since meeting her, he realized that hiding the truth might cost him the one person whose opinion mattered most. The invitation arrived 2 days later. Olivia almost threw it away. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold lettering, and addressed personally to her. She opened it during a break behind the restaurant and stared at the contents. Brooks Hospitality was hosting the grand opening of its newest luxury hotel downtown. Community partners, local business owners, employees, and selected guests had been invited. Olivia frowned. She assumed the invitation had been sent by mistake. That evening, Daniel appeared at the restaurant again. The distance between them still lingered. The easy rhythm they once shared had been replaced by careful conversations and unfinished thoughts. When Olivia mentioned the invitation, Daniel nodded. It was not a mistake. She looked surprised. You invited me? Daniel hesitated. Yes. Olivia folded her arms. Why? For a moment, he searched for the right answer. Then he said the truth. Because there are things I should have told you myself. Olivia looked away. Before she could respond, another table needed assistance. The conversation ended there, suspended in uncertainty. 3 nights later, the hotel opening arrived. The building dominated the city skyline, a gleaming tower of glass and light overlooking the river. Olivia almost stayed home. Hannah convinced her to go. You have spent weeks wondering what is really going on, her younger sister said. Maybe tonight you finally get answers. By 7 o'clock, Olivia stood inside the grand ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of guests. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city glowing beyond the riverfront. Business leaders mingled beside reporters and community members. Olivia felt completely out of place. She wore the nicest dress she owned, yet she still felt like a waitress who had wandered into the wrong building. Then she saw Mason. The boy immediately rushed toward her with a smile. You came. Olivia laughed. Looks like I did. Mason seemed genuinely relieved. Good. Before she could ask why, the ballroom lights dimmed. Conversations faded. A large screen illuminated the stage. A corporate announcer stepped forward and welcomed everyone to the evening celebration. Images appeared across the screen. New hotels, community projects, employee recognition programs. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Olivia watched politely, still unsure why she had been invited. Then the screen changed. A familiar face appeared. Daniel Brooks. Not in jeans. Not in the worn jacket she knew. He stood in a tailored suit before a row of luxury properties carrying the company logo. The audience immediately applauded. Olivia froze. The announcer smiled. Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Hospitality. The ballroom erupted. Olivia stared at the stage as Daniel emerged from behind a curtain. For several seconds, she could not process what she was seeing. This was not a successful businessman. This was the businessman, the owner, the founder, the man whose name appeared on every banner throughout the room. Daniel stepped to the microphone. Applause continued before gradually fading. Then his eyes found Olivia in the crowd. Out of hundreds of people, he looked directly at her. Before tonight, he began, I spent years believing money made it impossible to know who genuinely cared about you. The room grew quiet. So I started hiding the truth. I convinced myself it was the only way to find honest people. Olivia felt her heartbeat quicken. Daniel continued. Most of the time I found exactly what I expected. A few people laughed softly. Then his expression changed. But sometimes life surprises you. The screen behind him shifted again. To Olivia's shock, photographs appeared. Not of hotels. Not of business awards. Simple moments from the restaurant. Mason smiling over hot chocolate. A booth near the window. A waitress helping customers. Olivia's eyes widened. Daniel looked toward her once more. Sometimes you meet someone who treats people with kindness before knowing what they can offer in return. The ballroom remained silent. And for the first time since the truth came out, Olivia finally understood why he had asked her to come. The ballroom remained silent long after Daniel finished speaking. Hundreds of guests stood motionless beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, but Olivia barely noticed any of them. Her attention remained fixed on the man standing on the stage. For weeks, she had known Daniel as a hardworking father who worried about his son, laughed at simple jokes, and showed up at the same restaurant booth again and again. Now she was seeing the full picture for the first time. Yet strangely, the wealth was not what occupied her thoughts. It was the reason he had hidden it. Daniel stepped away from the microphone and made his way through the crowd. Every eye followed him. When he finally stopped in front of Olivia, neither of them spoke for several seconds. The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. I am sorry, Daniel said quietly. You deserve the truth. Olivia looked at him carefully. Why did you not trust me with it? The question was honest. Not angry. Daniel nodded slowly. Because before I met you, I stopped trusting almost everyone. Olivia lowered her eyes. For the first time, she understood that the disguise had never been about money. It had been about fear. Fear of disappointment. Fear of being valued for the wrong reasons. Fear of losing something genuine before it even began. Before either of them could say more, a small voice interrupted. Can I answer that? Mason had appeared beside them. Olivia immediately smiled. Daniel laughed softly. Of course. Mason looked up at Olivia with complete sincerity. Because he needed someone to like him before they liked everything else. The simple statement landed harder than any speech. Several guests nearby smiled. Olivia felt her eyes grow damp. Not because of the hotel. Not because of the applause. Because a 9-year-old boy had somehow explained the truth better than anyone else. Mason stepped closer. You never treated us differently. Olivia knelt slightly so she could look him in the eye. Why would I? Mason grinned. Exactly. The ballroom erupted into applause moments later as the official ceremony resumed. But the most important conversation had already happened. Over the following weeks, life did not transform overnight. Olivia continued working. Hannah continued studying. Mason continued bringing home school projects and soccer schedules. Yet something had changed. Daniel no longer hid who he was. More importantly, he no longer felt like he had to. One afternoon, he invited Olivia and Hannah to tour several community programs funded by Brooks Hospitality. Instead of luxury suites and executive offices, he showed them scholarship initiatives, employee assistance funds, and youth mentorship projects. Olivia quickly realized something. Daniel cared far more about people than publicity. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Mason sat at a picnic table in a city park finishing a school assignment while Daniel and Olivia talked nearby. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass. Children played in the distance. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Mason looked up from his notebook and watched them for a moment. Then he smiled. The expression carried none of the sadness that had once followed him everywhere. Daniel noticed and walked over. What are you smiling about? Mason shrugged. Nothing. Then he